This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 70 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Before we begin, one more little begging session. Remember, if you listened last week, you'll have heard that iTunes deleted/lost all of my reviews on the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Please help a girl out. Head over to wherever you listen to podcasts and leave a review for the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. It helps people to find it, and it helps iTunes to recognise that it's a good and well-loved podcast. So thank you. And now let's get on with episode 70. It is all about growing up in different cultures. So we've talked around this topic a few times. We've talked about all of the things that kids can learn from travelling. We've talked about how travel teaches all of us something useful. But what about if your travel is actually more connected to how you grow up or where your family grew up, and a few more kind of deeper kind of issues to do with travel and culture. And I've got two really interesting stories today from guests who have these kind of deep experiences, and I'm very excited to share them with you. So let us kick off with Leah Smileski. And Leah writes at Kid Bucket List, and she's a fellow Aussie. And I've known her on Facebook for a while and saw her talking about this amazing trip taking her kids back to Macedonia. Now, she's not Macedonian, her husband is. She doesn't even speak Macedonian. And this longish stint there was really fascinating. So I wanted to get her on the podcast to tell us more about it and to see kind of all the different things that they learned as a family and what the value that they got out of this, kind of deep travel. So over to Leah.
My husband and I had this idea that because our kids were they were now, at the time, they were 8 and 10, that we wanted to link them into their family heritage so that they could understand that connection, and then they'd have a sense of belonging where they are now and know more about themselves. So we went to Tasmania first because my mum's side is from Tasmania, and visited, when my parents got married, and where I initially lived, all of those little things. And we found that they're quite fascinated by it and asked lots of questions. I came home and asked my parents questions and found that really insightful about how our family dynamics and I guess why we have followed on some traditions or what have you.
Right.
But my dad's family are from Poland, so we hope to go there. But at the start of the year, my mother-in-law said that she was going to go back to Macedonia to see her, my kid's great-grandmother, who's now 94 years old, and still living in a tiny little village that does have electricity, but doesn't have running water in the same way we do. She hand pumps it up. Still has the outside toilet and everything, but does have electricity.
Okay.
And so I said, I wouldn't mind doing that. And everybody tried to persuade me not to do that because my husband's history is in Macedonia, which is a developing country. So it was part of the former Yugoslavian Republic, and it's separated from Croatia and Serbia and what have you, and it's become its own country. And they warned me about things called Polish drop toilets and which are outdoor toilets that it's just a big hole in the ground that literally drops down. They warned me about buses and erratic drivers. They warned me about pickpocketers and all these things that made me a little worried about it. And my husband couldn't come with us. He couldn't get the time off work during the European summer.
Right.
So he wouldn't come with me, and I'd be travelling initially with my in-laws and then I'd separate from them and do some things myself.
Right.
I think the whole travelling with your in-laws without your partner was the bit that people raised their eyebrows about. But I get along with my in-laws.
Right.
I'm really lucky and maybe that's because English is their second language, so sometimes I can manipulate them with a big word. I'm not sure. But I get along with them well. So,
right, okay.
And my
so it was
kids
not a
really
crazy
wanted
idea.
to find out about it. It wasn't so
Totally
crazy. Yeah, it wasn't totally crazy. So my idea when we went to Macedonia was that my kids would speak Macedonian when we were there,
Wow.
and learn how to speak, because they have a fluent receptive language, so they can understand everything said to them in Macedonian,
Right.
but they didn't have a very good expressive language.
Yeah.
So they found it really difficult to speak Macedonian. My husband speaks to them in Macedonian, but they'd always reply in English.
Right. But
So
they
I
can
wanted them to
understand
learn
him.
about that. Yeah, that's right. I wanted them to learn about the villages that they came from, or that their grandmother and grandfather came from, because they're proper old villages where I explained may not have running water. They're not very modern. So I wanted them to see that. I wanted them to see their cultural dress, and also the history of the country. And so that was my big idea.
Great idea.
So over we went. But I should say I don't speak any of the language. I don't understand any of the language. I had no real idea. I've been told about the country and the culture and I guess the political issues that are within that country, but I never really listened to people talking to me about that or really took it on board. I just had that idealistic view that everything would be perfect. Everything would be fine with a smile and some chocolate.
Chocolate normally solves most things.
Chocolate solves most issues. And it did. Chocolate was very helpful over there. If I went somewhere with some chocolate and offered that, people did smile and were very welcoming. So we went over and we spent almost 8 weeks in Macedonia, basing ourselves in 3 different cities at different times.
Amazing.
And my children absolutely loved it. They loved the villages where it was, they've got dirt floors. The houses are made of stone. They're constructed 2-story houses that are made of stone. And when I say 2-story, the first story is where the animals go at night, especially in winter, so that they all through winter. Then you go up the stairs to the home level, where they still, have those old combustion stoves that heat up the water, as well as cooking food, which run even through summer, so that you've got hot water that you've pumped in.
Right.
And whilst I found that at times overwhelming, my children embraced it and loved
fabulous.
It.
Wow.
And I think part of that is that they're almost free range. So there weren't as many, I guess, restrictions on them that you may have in a city or growing up.
True.
There weren't, they just didn't have the same concerns, or as a parent, I didn't have the same concerns in those villages as I would here. I mean, I did have concerns about ticks and mosquitoes and things because I'd read the Smart Traveller Guide, but I didn't actually have any issues with all those things. So my paranoia from reading Smart Traveller, Smart Traveller fueled my paranoia, which actually was unfounded once I was there.
That's
everything was fine.
Yes.
But they met their grandmother, who's this she was a big strapping lady at one time, but now she's 94 and she's a tiny little lady, and they were able to see her and talk to her in her language.
Yeah, how did they go? I want to know more about how their language picked up once they were there. How long was it before they were just sort of chattering away?
Well, I had my son and my daughter with me, and they both had different experiences with that. One of the issues is that I could only speak English.
Yes.
So I guess having that meant that I did stall the development a little bit, because once they were within a crowd or whatever, they'd revert to English because I was there.
Right.
But they met their cousins who don't speak any English.
Perfect.
And my daughter in particular learnt, by the time we got back, she could hold her own in conversation in Macedonian. So she can do that. We've kept that up. So once a week she has Skype calls with her cousins.
Oh, perfect.
And they speak Macedonian to her so that she can keep that up.
That's perfect.
And I've told my mother-in-law, you need to stop the English. You need to speak to her in Macedonian.
Yes.
And my husband has always done that. It's me. I've held them back by not being able to speak the language. But my son's lazy. when it comes to the language.
Right,
He would
yes.
nod his head to them, and he would gesture his responses rather than always reply.
Right,
So
okay.
his language didn't come along as well as hers did. I think that he's able to understand it even better than he could before, but he had pretty fluent receptive language before we went anyway.
Right, okay.
I guess he knows more of the euphemisms, because what happens when people come to us, so my in-laws came over here in this I guess the late 60s, early 70s, and they've spoken Macedonian, but their Macedonian language stopped then. It didn't
Yes, of
evolve.
course. It doesn't develop the way it does back home.
That's right. So when
Yes.
they go back, they speak old Macedonian.
Yes.
Everybody laughs for a few weeks
Yes.
until they pick
catch
it up again.
Yeah, yeah.
That's right. So my kids probably had old Macedonian as their receptive language.
Got it.
They've been able to build that up, which is quite exceptional. But they were able to see, my husband lived in Macedonia as a little boy for a number of years, so they were able to see where he lived and his room and their grandparents, and they rummaged through they had these big old cases, I guess. They rummaged through them and found, war medals from my father-in-law from World War One,
goodness.
Old photo, like such a rich history that my family do, because my family are from Poland. They came over as displaced people,
right,
on a ship to Fremantle and to South Australia. We don't have any of that.
Yeah,
so
right.
Having all of this, for me to see that was just amazing, to see all this history that was
so
just
cool.
in these cases.
Yeah.
From I think they were able to go 2 or 3 generations back with, this was their great-grandmother's wedding dress that was all handmade and
my gosh,
beaded.
Wow.
Just in these chests and cases. Amazing. To see that was pretty incredible.
I think Leah was pretty brave to take her kids along without her Macedonian-speaking husband for 2 months in Macedonia. But I can see she's very dedicated to really giving them a good understanding of that side of their culture, which they still experience back here in Australia with Macedonian relatives too. So it's a really interesting example of growing up with different cultures impacting on your life. And I think that trip will have influenced the kids' lives for the rest of their lives. Really interesting stuff. Now, my next guest is Jo Castro of Lifestyle 50, and Jo and her family have lived in many, many places around the world. Real travelling expat life, a few years here, a few years there. As Jo said in our episode on Western Australia recently, they've lived in Western Australia for 9 years, which is much longer than they've lived in any other place in the preceding few decades. So it's been a really interesting life for her 2 children. She has 2 children who are now in their early 20s, who are grown up and doing grown-up things. Well, in fact, one of them is, I think, this very week heading off on a trip around Australia in a van. So you might wonder where she gets those ideas from. But anyway, Jo talked to me at some length about the experiences of her kids growing up in many different cultures, and some of the pros and cons, I suppose, of that kind of expat life as a way to grow up. It was a really interesting chat. So over to Jo.
Obviously, our kind of travel has been life with expats with kids. And I think that there's been obviously benefits, and looking at it in a balanced way, there's been disadvantages for them too. Mm-hmm. But I think the very essence of the benefits for our children has been the exposure to variety and change, and really bringing up children, I think, is preparing them for life. So has travel prepared our kids for life? Well, yes, I think so. I think our children's generation has been launched into a world that's totally different to the one we were brought up in, and is now, I mean, you must see it as too with Ruben. It's changing so rapidly, and it's highly competitive, and more than ever, there's a global village. So I believe that travel helped our kids. It prepared them for this new landscape. It taught them that one size doesn't always fit all, and different approaches may be appropriate. If you're trying to solve a problem in India, the solutions you use will probably be quite different to Australia, and it's taught them that taught them that they need to understand that people of different cultures think in different ways, and there isn't just one correct answer that allows you to maybe navigate your way through life's challenges on a set route. So it's really exposed them to that kind of variety. I think it's also taught our kids to think out of the box. They certainly don't accept the norm. And as teenagers, that's always, I think, possibly teenagers don't accept the norm anyway, but there was quite a few interesting discussions in our house as we travelled, and they were uprooted from friends and, situations they were comfortable in. But I think that from that, they've become way beyond any form of racism. They're really compassionate, and they understand that living means being able to adapt to change very much. And they also understand loss because they've had to leave friends and family so many times. And from that, they're also very grateful for gain as well, because those, the scales there, the loss, the gain of something. If you're moving to a new country, there will be new exciting things and new friends to be made, whereas on the other hand, they're losing old friends and losing old ways of doing things which they've become comfortable with. So they've had to be able to change very quickly and be optimistic. And I think they've learnt to be optimistic, which is great.
Yes, I bet.
I think also as expats, they've been exposed to great privilege, and that's both a positive and a negative. But I think they understand from that we weren't always the most privileged in those situations, but they understand that privilege comes with responsibility, and that not everyone is privileged. And they really get that. And I think they get that because they've seen privileged people who are not in the least grateful for their good fortune.
Yeah. And
they've also helped out at orphanages after school in developing countries where they've seen children who have nothing. And, they've come to realise that many people are grateful for tiny mercies, and we should base our assumptions on privilege, about privilege on that. And so I would say that travel has sensitised our children, and it's made them unwilling to accept pomposity of any sort and unwilling to accept privilege unless it's been hard won, which is great. Lovely. They were in a school once, and lots of times, but they were in one school which we thought would be really good, and we paid a lot of money to send them there, and they both said they really didn't want to be there anymore. It was like children would arrive back from the holidays in a helicopter and be jetting off to amazing places for the holidays.
Right.
And there was such amazing privilege, but I think kids, we'd been maybe living in Hong Kong prior to that in a tiny flat on the 11th floor or something. Yeah. And it was, they couldn't understand this enormous great wealth, and it seemed, so that was just a small example.
Yeah.
I think, if you travel, the kids are going to have to move schools, move homes, say goodbye to family and friends, meet new friends, learn about new cultures, fit in with different peer groups, change curriculums, change sporting activities. And so even if you were good at something, things, these are heart-wrenching challenges. I remember Sam was really good at table tennis, and we moved, and the next country, nobody played table tennis, but they played squash, and so he became very good at squash. And then we moved, and it was rugby, and then we moved, and it wasn't rugby anymore; it was football. So
Gosh.
he became a master of. He was lucky; he was very sporting, but he became a master at being good at sport or whatever was thrown at him. And perhaps he would have been a world champion if he'd stuck at one sport. And there's all these things, or did we do the right things? Maybe what if? But so I think there's also negatives that can leave indelible scars, like that. Perhaps in years to come, he'll tell us that. And although travelling children can be highly successful chameleons and adapt to their new surroundings, they can also be left with, I think, significant insecurities from being wrenched from routine and stability. And so you have to keep an open discussion going all the time.
Yes.
And I I hope we manage to do that. I think in teenage years it gets harder.
I bet.
So I think, the great benefits that children can acquire through living overseas, I think must also be weighed against the negatives. And any family that's lived in a different culture will find their own way perhaps of patching up any cracks formed from being wrenched from their root community. I think, for example, during our children's younger years and their teens, we made an almost yearly pilgrimage back to my mum's home in Devon in England.
Yes. Yeah, so make that a priority.
Yeah, so that then there was this recurring theme of tradition and family.
Yeah.
And I think that was quite an important anchor point for our children when they were younger.
Yes, I bet, yeah.
So I think travel has made our children who they are, but at the end of the day, I wouldn't say that it's benefited them more, say, than children who haven't moved around, or that it's made them any worse. It's just now part of their DNA, part of their fabric, and part of who they are and who they've become. So
yeah, no, I think that makes sense. But I think like something you said early on is it's prepared them for like the global village, and you wouldn't have known this when you started how the world would change and become so globalized, and that this would become a really important thing for them. So perhaps it's been an unexpected but big advantage for them.
Yes, I don't think we would ever really, in our wildest dreams, have thought that when we started out, but now it's so, it's so, you might be doing business with someone in a totally different country on the internet and just not quite understanding why they're reacting to you in that way. But traveling definitely teaches people and children, well, let's look at it from a different angle here, or let's unpack this culture a bit, and let's expose myself to the different lifestyle this person is living, and how can we solve this issue. So I think yes, it definitely teaches them that.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. When I was speaking with Sharon Goulet from Where's Sharon recently, something that she said really struck me when she was talking about travelling with kids. And so she's living back in Australia now, but she sends her kids to a bilingual school. And one of the reasons for that and the continued travel that they do is that she says she wants them to be global citizens, not so much necessarily Australian citizens, but global citizens, because she can see that in the future that is what we need now in the world. So that struck me as important.
Definitely. I think that's so true. And there's a quote I found by someone called Ted Ward, who's a sociologist, and he said there is good reason to travel with kids, because he said that third culture kids are the prototype citizens of the future, which kind of hangs in there with Sharon's philosophy too, that the world is going to be a global village. So the more global that you can be and fit into that, the better.
I think thinking about travelling and living abroad as being a way to be kind of a global citizen is a really important concept. The world is so global now. When I work online, I work with people from all parts of the world, and it's important to understand that different people work in different ways and in all of the different nuances between different cultures. And obviously kids who've grown up in different cultures will have, absorbed that concept without even, really realising it. So, it's an interesting idea. I like to think that I'm raising my son to be a good global citizen, just simply by trying to make him aware that, all of cultural differences and cultural similarities, and that, people are really all the same despite our differences, and exposing him to those as much as I can, both through travel and just through things we do at home and discussions we have, or things we watch, things we read. So, yeah, some stuff to think about, which is, I guess, the aim of a podcast that includes the word thoughtful. So I'll let you go and ponder that. So that's it for today for episode 70 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. You can find all the details in the show notes at notaballerina.com/70. Do come over to the Thoughtful Travellers Facebook group. There's a link in the show notes, and tell us what you think about growing up in different cultures. Did you in fact travel the world as a kid? Did you have the expat life, or do you now as an adult, and what does that mean for how you see the world and how you think about it? In the meantime, you can also do a bit of extra reading on the websites of our fabulous guests today. So you can check out Leah's blog, Kid Bucket List, which is at kidbucketlist.com.au. And obviously that's a great destination if you want to know about family travel stuff. You can also see Jo's website, Lifestyle50, at lifestyle50.com, or her more travel-focused blog, Zigazag, which is at zigazag.com. And hop over to Twitter. I love tweeting people, so come and tweet with me at Amanda Kendall, and you can use the hashtag ThoughtfulTravelPod. Lovely to have you here again. Thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.